Ich träumte von bunten Blumen, so wie sie wohl blühen im Mai. Ich träumte von grünen Wiesen, von lustigem Vogelgeschrei, von lustigem Vogelgeschrei.
Germany, the province of Hesse, and the city of Mainzlar. This beautiful area of Germany is the ancestral home of the Kloos family. The family, known in Germany as Kloos, had been well established in Mainzlar in the state of Hesse since at least the early 1700s. On February 28, 1847, in Mainzlar, a baby boy was born to Heinrich and Dorothea Kloos, a fifth child and third son. He was baptized in the beautiful and ancient Kirchberg Church and named Balthasar Kloos. His father, Heinrich, was a master shoemaker and a farmer. Dorothea Kloos died in 1856. Between this family tragedy and the economic and political upheaval in Europe at this time, Heinrich made the decision to sell his land and relocate his young family, including 12-year-old Balthasar, to America. They left on the 42-day journey from Bremen, Germany, on the ship Elise and Mathilde in 1859 and arrived in New York in the summer of that year. Immediately they moved on to St. Paul and by September had settled on a farm of 80 acres in Carver County. Later, Heinrich would expand this farm by another 140 acres. Charles Balthasar Kloos, still known as Balthasar Kloos, would finish his growing up in Carver County. He would meet his young American-born wife-to-be, Margaret Eichmiller, and marry her in 1875. He was 28 years old and she 19. By this time, Balthasar began to be known as Charles, and Kloos became Kloos. In a wedding account in the Chaska Weekly Valley Herald, he is referred to in the following way.
We understand that Charles Kloos is a good boy and is worthy of so estimable a young lady as Miss Eichmiller.
The German Balthasar Kloos had become the American Charles Balthasar Kloos. The young couple lived several years in St. Paul, with Charles entering business college as well as working in a steamboat office. Their children, Anne, Ludwig, and the first William, were born in St. Paul. While Charles Balthasar Kloos and Margaret were living in St. Paul, his job at the steamboat company exposed him to a slightly older young man who had begun as a clerk in a steamboat company. In 5 years, this young man had learned the ropes of freight, had become an owner of a freight company, and soon would be known through America as an entrepreneur in transportation. Thus began a lifelong friendship between C.B. Kloos and James J. Hill of Great Northern Railway fame. Both men were shrewd businessmen, Hill in the acquisition of land and the extension of the railroad across country, Kloos in the acquisition of farmland and the expansion of those acres into production acres. After C.B. had moved and had become a farmer in west central Minnesota, James J. Hill would travel on a train passenger car to Moose Island near Donley, have the car pulled off the rail, and the Klooses would pick him up to spend the week hunting pheasants or ducks, or fishing with a mutual friend, General Barrett, who had a bonanza farm near Donley. C.B., along with James J. Hill, became familiar sights in the area and made public presentations, as shown in this picture of James J. Hill addressing the crowds at a parade in Herman, Minnesota in 1909. In 1879, the call of farming life had drawn Margaret and Charles away from St. Paul and on to first Delaware Township in Grant County, where Charles began his career in farming, then in 1882 to Mackville Township, and finally in 1894 to Roseville Township, to a farm on the shores of Lake Patchen. This site would become the home base of the Kloos family and stay in the family to the present day. In 1897, their farmhouse became the site of the Patchen Post Office, where it would remain until 1907. Charles was listed as postmaster 1897 to 1903, and Margaret from 1903 to its closing in 1907. The Patchen Post Office was operated from the bay window on the side of the house. Grandson Herb Kloos, whose father was the second William born to C.B. and Margaret, relates a story from his grandparents' move to Delaware Township in 1879.
It was late fall, and they needed to construct a sod home to get through the winter with their 3 children and one, Herb's father, who was only 2 weeks old when they arrived. As the oxen team was turning the sod, one of the oxen died. With only a short time until the weather changed, C.B. rigged a yoke system that allowed him to help the single oxen pull the plow while Margaret operated the plow and cut the sod for their home.
Ox and man-woman power got the job done. In the book, The History of Douglas and Grant County, Minnesota, edited by Constant Larson in 1916, describes Charles's success as a farmer. That farm he developed and improved with the best of buildings, and there he engaged in general farming and stock raising very successfully, steadily increasing his land holdings until he is the owner of some 5,000 acres in Grant and Stevens counties and 600 acres in Mahnomen. The Klooses continued to expand their family. Their children were Anna, Ludwig, known as Louis, William L., who died in his first year, William Charles, Lee, Cora, Ora, who were twins, Prettyman, known as Britt, Mabel, who died at age 3, Ethel, who died at age 7, Lawrence, and Alice. At Charles's death, his 9 surviving children came into their inheritance. Each surviving son received a section, 640 acres of land, and each surviving daughter received a quarter section, 160 acres. Charles's interests went beyond farming and sorting mail into public service. The history of Douglas and Grant County continues this narrative. Politically, Charles B. Kloos is independent, but he has always taken an active interest in the local affairs, is a strong advocate of the best of public improvements, and a supporter of all worthy enterprises that lead to the betterment and the growth of the township and the county. He is a man of excellent judgment and broad experience, and is recognized as one of the most prominent men in the county. He has served as a member of the Board of Township Supervisors for many years and was chairman of the board. He has also served as township clerk and has had much to do with the civic life of the community for many years. He and his family are active members of the German Lutheran Church and have long been prominent in the social and the religious life of the community. Beside his involvement in township and church, Charles was a director of the Donley Lumber Company, which began in 1914. One of his sons, Lee, later managed the lumber company. C.B. was also the first president of the Farmers and Merchants Bank starting in 1912, which operated under that name until 2013. He was a longtime director on the boards of the Farmers State Bank of Hoffman and Herman. In 1920, Charles B. and Margaret Kloos moved into Donley, Minnesota to escape the bustle of the farm. Plus, Margaret said their 3 sons who were living with them on the farm would never marry if they didn't move off the farm site. The sons did marry. 2 of the future wives met C.B. before meeting his handsome sons. They were both teachers at District No. 16 in Roseville Township, on the land which C.B. had donated for this purpose. He was on the school board and interviewed the young women who would become 2 of his daughters-in-law in the future. Britt met and married Valborg Foslin. Son Lawrence also met his wife, Floris Pattison, while she was teaching in District No. 16. Son William met his wife, Lorna Holmes, as she cared for her brother-in-law, Dr. John Gooch Whittemore, in Donley. These 3 Kloos sons were 41, 39, and 32 when they married their young brides, who were in their early 20s. Charles and Margaret Kloos were the grandparents of a goodly sum of grandchildren, not only from the 3 long-standing bachelor sons. Their 9 living daughters and sons produced a total of 29 grandchildren. Charles died suddenly, May 27, 1923, at the age of 76, following an unexpected 2-day illness. Margaret would follow him in 1941 at the age of 85 after a 5-year illness. But who was Charles Balthazar Kloos? He was a father and husband, a very successful farmer, businessman, and public servant, but what was he like? He was determined. Grandson Richard Kloos tells the story of the nearest markets being at St. Cloud or Wilmer in the early farming years.
It took 4 to 5 days with oxen to make the trip. Arnie and Charles walked the entire distance to and from Wilmer with a sack of flour on their backs.
Arnie was a full-blooded Norwegian neighbor, and CB was a full-blooded German. Both continued to speak their respective original languages. Norwegians and German-speaking Low German could understand each other in these early settlement neighborhoods. CB liked cars and the milestone of progress they represented. Edna Mae Bush mentions this in The History of Donnelly. In May of 1912, F.J. McLaughlin, J.C. Pfeiffer, C.B. Kloos, and Fred Zemer took the train to Minneapolis. There they each purchased a car. They started home and got as far as Cokato. Roads were so muddy that they had to leave their cars there. Their triumphal parade into Donnelly in their new cars had to be delayed until the roads dried up. Farm machinery was a different story. CB's grandsons, Herb, Lawrence, and Richard, recall the stories told by their own dads. Apparently, CB didn't buy any new farm machinery. He purchased used. This was upon the counsel of a banker friend who advised purchase of land as the priority and used equipment for the working of the land. The sons got sick and tired of spending all their time out of the field fixing up old equipment. But progress was acquisition of good land and new cars. But the steadfast used equipment could still do the job. Charles Balthazar Kloos made the transition from German schoolboy to immigrant to successful farmer and businessman, from citizen of Old Hesse to the new wilder plains of western Minnesota, and he did it with grace and honor. At his death, he was described as public-spirited, a community leader of recognized integrity, who always maintained a hospitable home. He was held in the highest regard by all who knew him, and his friends were legion. It seems that Charles Balthazar Kloos lived the words of his father, Heinrich, who wrote a poem which he sent to relatives in Germany in 1865, urging them to come to America. This is the translation.
Yes, here in this promised land where true brotherly love exists, we live at the edge of the trees, where God's blessings richly flow and every free ray of sun enlarges our earthly happiness.